Welcome, welcome, welcome to SummitCast 2025. I am so glad that you're here with me. And this SummitCast is part of my Dear Future Me leadership tour for this year. And I am Dr. Rhonda Simmons, your executive leadership consultant. And today we're diving into something few executive women talk about openly, but deeply crave. And that is stillness. Not just peace and quiet, but strategic stillness. Let's be clear, busyness is not a badge of honor. But for many of us in the C-suite, we've been conditioned to believe that productivity equals worth. That constant movement signals effectiveness. That if we're not grinding, we're not growing. But here's the hard truth. Motion without meaning is just glorified burnout. So let's jump in a little bit closer and talk about what life often looks like for high achieving women in leadership. Your calendar is triple booked. You're in meetings that could have been emails. You've built a team you can't trust to take real initiative because you haven't had the bandwidth to build their capacity. Even your rest is scheduled, but it rarely feels restful. You're successful on paper, but suffocating in practice. Strategic stillness isn't about stopping everything. It's about sacred pause. It's about creating intentional white space in your calendar, in your mind, and in your decision making. Stillness allows you to assess without pressure, to think without panic, and to lead with presence, not reaction. In fact, the most visionary leaders I've worked with built entire quarters of their company's success around a 30-minute stillness practice every week. Why? Because clarity needs room to land. In my executive deep dives, I walk leaders through the capacity versus calling grid. We map out the noise, identify the overcommitments, and reclaim your calendar from chaos. We assess what's urgent versus what's essential, and that's critical. That's a critical piece right there. And we assess what can be delegated with dignity. We also assess what boundaries need to be drawn on paper and in people. And we co-create rhythms that create focus, not friction. So even Jesus withdrew. In Mark chapter 6, verse 31, it says, "Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place and rest a while." That's what Jesus told his leaders, his disciples. Leadership requires replenishment. Stillness is not a break from strategy. It is the birthplace of it. So here's what I want you to get. Imagine this. Your mornings begin with reflection, not reactivity. Your team is aligned, empowered, and executing because you lead with clarity, not chaos. You no longer react to every fire because you've learned to anticipate instead of scramble. Stillness becomes your superpower, your secret to sustainability. So strategic stillness is not passive. It's a leadership posture. It's a power move. And if you're ready to build a life and a legacy that does not require your constant burnout to thrive, stay with me. I've got something powerful to show you right after this break. And I'll be back in just a moment. You're the one they depend on, the fixer, the finisher. But what happens when you need a reset? In the Executive Deep Dive, I help high-achieving women like you step back, zoom out, and design a life and leadership model that works for you, not against you. No more juggling, no more just surviving. This is where clarity creates capacity and impact. There are only 5 seats available, so let's build your breakthrough together. Book now at the link in the comments or the show notes, and I'll see you there. All right. So I wanted to share the next topic we said we would talk about, and that's boundaries that stick. So in this section of our Summit Cast, let's continue. And so the scripture says, and let your yea be yea and your nay, nay. That's what it says in Matthew 5:37. I just love how the Bible is filled with practical, applicable solutions to our everyday life situations. So let's talk about the second pillar of self-care. By the way, did you know that today is International Self-Care Day, July 24th? 2025. That's why I wanted to have this Summit Cast today, because it is International Self-Care Day. So let's talk about this second pillar of self-care leadership, boundaries that stick. One thing you have to know as a leader is that boundaries are not walls. They're actually bridges. They're strategic, they're soul-anchored bridges between who you are and what you allow into your life. But far too often, women in executive roles find themselves building skyscrapers of responsibility without the foundation of clarity. And what's missing? Boundaries. What it looks like right now for you is that you're saying yes because it's easier than the discomfort of no. Your calendar is double booked or triple booked, not because you're disorganized, but because everyone expects you to be everything. You're the point of contact, the point of decision, and the point of failure because you've taught people that your open door policy is always open, even when it's burning you out. And here's the kicker: your boundaries aren't being crossed. They were never actually communicated. But here's the shift that I want you to know. When I work with my teams, particularly in my executive deep dive or strategy sessions, we start by redefining boundaries as an act of leadership clarity. Because boundaries that stick are pre-decided, they're not made in the heat of the moment, they're rooted in your non-negotiables. Boundaries that stick are protected by culture. The entire team respects them because you've led with consistency and conviction. Boundaries that stick are powered by language. You don't just say no, you say, here's what I can offer you instead. You redirect, not retreat. Let me give you an example. A leader I worked with was constantly drained from back-to-back meetings that left no time for strategy. We implemented a white space block, a 90-minute daily window where she was unreachable, non-negotiable. At first, her team resisted, but then they started bringing better questions, solving problems without her, and respecting her time. She didn't lose authority. She gained leadership equity. And that's what boundaries do. They don't limit your impact, they expand it. They allow people around you to rise instead of relying. After boundaries are respected, here's what you can know that you're going to receive and how things will be different. You will operate with clarity, not clutter. You'll lead from overflow, not obligation. And you'll build a culture where people trust your no just as much as your yes. And here's the truth. When your boundaries are clear, your capacity increases, not because you're doing more, but because you're doing what only you are called to do. That's what I help teams implement. Boundaries that empower, not isolate. So coming up in our segment 3, I'm going to be talking about self-care as a KPI. Yes, you'll find out what a KPI is, but you probably already know. But before we move on, I want to share a quick story of transformation from one of my executive clients. This 60-second break will give you a behind the scenes look at how boundaries led to breakthrough in real time. Actually, let me go ahead and share my story with you before we cut to the break. I had to incorporate, once I actually thought about making some shifts and changes, I had to incorporate some intentional rest. Yes, and some boundaries where my phone is on silent. I don't respond to text messages. I don't get up and reply to every emergency, because I found out things are not always an emergency. And so I had to incorporate that 60 seconds of silence throughout my day, where I took time, I closed my door, I got quiet, and I was still. And my staff knew if the door was closed and I locked it, that means I am unavailable. I won't be answering their knocks. And they did knock a few times. But after a couple of tries and me not responding, they got the message. Let me tell you, those 60 seconds were golden to me. I took them several times, and this is when I was a principal. I took them several times throughout the day just to keep myself grounded and centered, so that I would remember the mission and know that I could be successful. And when those 60 seconds were up, it gave me a chance to take a breath and to continue mission. So when we come back, I'm going to share with you about self-care as a KPI. So stay tuned. You've mastered the metrics, managed the meetings, but behind the title, you're craving something deeper. Balance, vision, and leadership that actually feels like you. I'm Dr. Rhonda Simmons, and your Executive Deep Dive is where we trade burnout for brilliance and create a roadmap aligned with both your brilliance and your boundaries. Because real leadership doesn't mean doing more. It means doing what matters most without sacrificing your well-being to do it. Just 5 sessions are open. Claim yours today at the link in the show notes or the comments below. All right, we are back and we are ready to go. I hope you've been enjoying these segments of sharing about self-care. Again, this is International Self-Care Day. And this SummitCast is part of my Dear Future Me leadership tour for this year. You don't want to miss every event that I have planned on the tour between now and the end of the year, because 2026, something big is coming. No, I'm not going to tell you now. This is not that time, but you're going to find out. So stick with me. So let's talk about something that often gets dismissed in boardrooms and buried in leadership reports. And that is self-care as a key performance indicator, or KPI. We track revenue, we track retention, we track ROI, return on investment. But when was the last time your organization measured how well your leaders are actually doing? I'm not talking about deadlines or deliverables. I mean how they're really doing behind the metrics. Because if your team is hitting KPIs while hiding burnout, you're not winning. You're bleeding silently. So let's redefine success. Success is a vice president who still has time for dinner with her family. Success is a team lead who doesn't flinch when her calendar dings. Success is knowing your people aren't performing under pressure, but with peace. Because when leaders are whole, the culture follows. Think of self-care like a stability metric. It's predictive. It tells you how sustainable your leadership pipeline really is. You wouldn't ignore your car's dashboard warning lights. We're not even going to talk about the lights that's on my dashboard right now, but I'm not going to ignore it. So why do we ignore the ones going off in our leaders? If you're seeing increased absenteeism, decreased engagement, or quiet quitting, that's not a motivation problem. It's a margin problem. It's the consequence of making excellence your idol and stillness your enemy. So here's the shift. As an executive leadership consultant, I encourage my clients to track leadership wellness the same way they track profit. What are your internal self-care KPIs? That could be how many hours of protected focus time do your top leaders have each week? How often do your managers actually take the PTO they've earned? Are your women leaders supported with space to lead, live, and breathe? Because guess what? You can't scale what you don't sustain. And you cannot sustain what you don't protect. Somebody said that'll preach, but it's the truth. So how does this shift look in real life? I recently worked with a leadership team who was meeting deadlines, but missing joy. One woman said to me, I hit every single target, but I haven't had a moment to breathe in months. So I introduced a customized rhythm reset plan, something I build out with each of my executive clients. This plan included focus blocks, buffer days, and even white space windows or sacred time with no meetings, no tasks, just margin. Not only did her output improve, but so did her mood. Her team noticed it and the culture lifted. That's the ripple effect of a rested leader. So I'll ask you, what if self-care wasn't a luxury, but a leadership skill? What if it wasn't something you did after hours, but something embedded into your hours currently? What if we stopped seeing rest as a reward for the exhausted and started seeing it as a responsibility of the empowered? So when you build wellness into your workplace, burnout becomes the exception, not the norm. And that's when true sustainable leadership emerges, because performance should never come at the cost of the person. Let me repeat that. Performance should never come at the cost of the person. Now, as you reflect on that, let me take a quick break, but stay with me, because when we return, we're diving into more tools to help you lead from overflow, not obligation. You've mastered the boardroom, but your balance sheet of life, it's overdrawn. Your title shines, but your time, your peace, your joy, they're on back order. After working with me, high-achieving women don't just get more done. They feel more aligned, more fulfilled, and more alive. You'll leave the executive deep dive with a tailored strategy that honors your values, vision, and well-being. You don't have to choose between impact and wholeness. You were built for both. Let's map out the version of success that feels like you. Click on the link below in the comments or in the show notes to get started on your journey.